Thank you for joining today's session. I'm Karen Frost with the Water Council, and we're joining you from a very cold, windy, and rainy day here in Wisconsin. I know our colleagues in Florida are much better situated than we are. But I wanted to welcome you to the session today. We're going to be talking about the ICE Institute. ICE stands for Innovation, Commercialization, Exchange, and that very much represents our partnership with the Federal Lab Consortium. Dean Amhouse, our President and CEO, actually mentioned that in his introductory comments this morning. But I'm joined today by Dr. Garman. Dr. David Garman is the Director and the Chief Technology Officer for ICE Institute, the new program of the Water Council. He is also the Associate Vice Chair for Water Technology Research and Development at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. We'll also be joined later by three of the team from the Everglades Foundation in Florida. We'll be joined by Tom Van Lent, the Vice President of Programs, Leanne Tellum, the Interim Director for the George Barley Water Prize, and Deborah Johnson, the Vice President of Development. So I'm going to turn over this session to Dr. Garman, and he's going to be talking about the ICE Institute and the details of that program and how it intersects with the Federal Lab Consortium and our joint initiatives.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Garman. As Karen said, I have a new appointment, which you may have picked up as CTO and Director of the ICE Institute. And my day job is as Vice Chancellor of UW-Milwaukee for Water Technology Research and Development. At the end of this presentation, I hope that you'll have an understanding about how the program came about, what we hope to achieve, what the focus of ICE is, how does the program work and who benefits out of this, something about how water technology is defined and how it's identified, how the program aligns with the FLC, and also how you can become involved. The other aspect which, and I may not cover these all in quite enough detail in the time available, but so we have a question and answer at the end of this to be able to pick up on all the points that we miss out on. So the program really came about because of our industry partners telling us that their understanding of water technology differs very greatly from many of the traditional researchers' ideas of water technology. And I'll give you some examples of this a bit later on. And the Water Council is, as an economic development group, is very interested in ensuring that its member partners are able to both capture the markets and their future markets, as well as being able to lead to economic development both for Milwaukee and also to enable U.S. industry to move forward as water availability and water resources change. So the second aspect of that was, where is the gap? What is the enabling aspect which needs to be brought forward? And where we found the gap related to the transfer of research to industry. This is traditionally known as the valley of death in many cases, but we wanted to go actually a lot further than that, because what many of the researchers were telling us was their research never gets in front of the water industry people who actually need to see it. So the focus of ICE is to identify at a very early stage, and some of this could be in the late stage of proof of concept, or it could be at a stage of where patenting, licensing, or even startup companies are beginning. So who is the program for? In this, the Water Council and the ICE Institute will be really their clients are the industry partners. And those industry partners, we will be linking with federal laboratories, with research, university research centers, institutes, and some small companies, startup companies, to identify the technologies which are going to match with industry needs. I'm going to show you a slide later on about how it works, and I'm also going to explain a little bit more about the water technology definition, and it's much more complicated than water technology. And finally, I hope to be able to show you how the water program aligns with the FLC and commitments which have been given at the highest level about making this happen. And finally, I'd like to say this is voluntary as far as the laboratories are concerned, but we hope it's very much in your interests to become involved, and we want to be able to show that there is a compelling case for you to link with us to be able to get your technologies into commercialization. So in the next slide, the basis for the involvement of the FLC is really the White House water commitment. And this came out of initially the meeting in December last year, which then was translated into the actual commitments which were made in March earlier this year. And the commitment said that that the White House would enable public data access to federal labs, water and water-related technologies. And in doing this, which is a nice, simple statement, I don't think they fully realize the complexity or the mechanisms that will be required to make this happen. The Water Council had, prior to this, working with Innovation Exchange, has launched the Global Water Port, or PORT is what we generally refer to it as. And it's an online research tool which enables us to access thousands of real-time water data sources. It's driven by Watson, so it's IBM supported, and this really has got dimensions which, as a university researcher more recently, I found very, very useful. And what this enables us to do is to put the Federal Lab Consortium's information sources, as well as those which from the US Water Partnership, into PORT so that it would become more accessible through the system and would enable us to do a lot more. I just want to emphasize that PORT can be a public source of data. It is also possible for work in progress, for example, for it to be restricted in terms of restricted access. And the database itself has been used, for example, to protect health data in certain areas, which enables total privacy both for individuals and for organizations in terms of making this happen. So very high security, lots of privacy, and meets all the federal requirements in terms of data protection, data source protection. The next slide gives you an example of the outputs from port, so that in terms of picking up the initial word picture, if we were looking at some aspects of treatment of biosolids, and we were then looking to see some specific aspects about water cluster circles, we could look at, for example, aspects of sulfurous acid emissions and the treatment systems which are related to that from perhaps incineration of biosolids. We can then move into, in terms of what is available, to link that through in terms of the types of people who were doing work, companies who had those types of technologies, documentation of performance, research papers which were related to that, and more importantly, the interrelationships. What we found is that this is one of the most powerful aspects of it, is being to be able to show where clusters of expertise are located, where you can go to find specific knowledge, and how that knowledge can be related and has been translated into actual technologies. You can look at the number of documents and treatment systems, for example, historically, and which is shown in the bottom left-hand corner. And you can also do this in terms of specific word documentation to have a look at how this fits and examine the types of topics and how those are classified under the various headings. You can go back and refine this at any one stage, and you can also add to this if your initial searches doesn't give you enough detail. Finally, you can identify the key people who appear in the top talent list and who are doing most of the work in this area. So if we were able to add to this the additional knowledge bases which coming from the federal labs, we feel this would be a huge improvement. We know that their lab systems and their patent systems are now available. However, in looking at that, we have found a couple of major outcomes. First of all, most of the sharing goes on internally within the lab system or within federal organizations, with very little interaction, it appears from the databases anyway, very little interactions with industry. And secondly, that only the mature patented information is actually being made available to that. We think this is probably restricting the potential of new technologies to be able to reach out and to link with industry. And I'll show you why in a little while, as when we look at the ICE process. When we look at the next slide, we can see what are related to industry concentrations and water risks. This figure, diagram, or cartoon was developed by the Water Council as part of its preliminary submission for a NIST proposal for a center related to water security and water technology. The interesting things which come out of that show not so much that probably everybody realized what where the industry concentrations are, but if you overlay that with the water risk aspects, you can see that apart from the areas around the Great Lakes, and even there are certain industries at risk as you move away from the lakes. Just about, there are many areas of the U.S. of which the industry as a whole has a major aspect of a water risk relating to its operations. This is even more telling when you come to the top Fortune 500 companies in the world, in which over half of them have now identified water risk as a major aspect of their business operations. The pressure is then coming, how do we move from existing technologies to future technologies, and who is going to provide that? This then leads to the next aspect, which deals with the ICE Institute framework. I mentioned up front that water is not a simple single NAICS code. Unlike energy, which is a small number of codes, where we get to, water in fact comprises 34 NAICS codes. It means that if somebody classifies something or puts a title in as water, you may quite often only ever reach the core 14 within that NAICS code, and the balance, which is another 20, are actually left out. So you could well be dealing with nanotechnology, you could be dealing with metal hardening, you could be looking at some aspects of radio communication, you could be looking at biofilms and rapid microbiological detection, and you could be looking at protein and protein analysis. All of these are related to some aspects of the water industry. So to try to overcome this complexity, the ICE Institute was conceived to link in a more direct aspect member or industry needs in an attempt to match them to emerging technologies. I've already mentioned that this would cover the federal labs, and if you look at the slide, the federal labs are the top of our list because the amount of money which the federal government is actually committing in these areas to water and the associated supporting technologies, the whole of those 34 related industry classifications. Research and development institutions, universities, corporate R&D activities, entrepreneurs, and small and medium enterprises, SMEs. Trying to locate those, we will use both the two tools. One would be PORT. The second one, we will use intelligent humans. Robots aren't always that good. But using scouts to identify and catalogue relevant research and technology. Now, this won't go all at once. In fact, the first thing that will happen is there'll be a small number of priority needs which will be listed for by the members for us to search out. This may be as few as 10 in the first instance. The scouts, who will be distributed all over the US, we hope will have direct interactions with the federal labs, with the various research institutions, other corporation R&D, universities, and would become not only as interrogation sources, but also become contacts for other people to offer technologies to them to be able to move forward. Having got those, the list of technologies which most closely identify with the member needs, we will internally use our technical databases powered by the Global Water Port and then supplemented by other literature research activities, patent research activities, and some other commercialization systems which we have and we have access to be able to bring those together. An internal technical review team working with the industry will then prioritize those and evaluate those to give a synthesis report. Those synthesis reports excuse me, will then be provided to a panel of global experts who will vet those, provide recommendations or gaps in the analysis, and finally they will be sent for member review. You can see in the background this looks like a flow chart. We have the little waves of water, and each one we could regard as a filter which at successive stages we look at material which moves to the next stage, and then also material which finally ends up for the member review. It doesn't mean to say that any material which is collected is lost. In fact, this goes back into a database which will be added into the port and will be there for future reference, so nothing else is ever wasted. And we will also be moving into using that as it becomes available, and if it is allowed to be available, as a public database for other people to be able to have access to. After the member review, the members will either take this for the next stage of development. We could think of this in, if we were to use the NASA terminology, for example, taking this from TRL 3 through to TRL 8. This would be done either through other funding sources, federal or industry funding sources, or may be done entirely by industry members as well. We would assist in putting together teams to develop and advance the technology. One of the ways we could do this is through the IUCRC Water Equipment and Policy Group, which is the green box in the middle towards the top. Or we can work through other test pilot facilities which are around the country, both for market development and also using these for new companies. And I might add that the Water Council has funds for startup companies called the BREW program, which is both able to put up some seed funding as well as to attract investment to move these forward. So overall, this we can summarize this slide as being a sourcing, filtering, documenting, and evaluation process, so that in very simple terms, a search and screen process, which will look at technologies not only which are disruptive future technologies, also look at some of the incremental improvements in technologies, and finally we might look at those technologies which are developing new market niches to be able to move the water industry forward. The structure of this is within the Water Council, and I already mentioned the BREW Accelerator as being one of the Water Council activities. It also has a small business channel, the Pilot Deployment Program, an angel investor training, and the Alliance for Water Services, the North American headquarters are here, and we also have links internationally through the International Water Association. The ICE Institute is probably the biggest, or is going to be the biggest of these groups at the moment, and has an industry advisory committee. Myself, as will be leading this as director and CTO. The international advisors report to me, and the scouts and the primary scout coordinator looks at both the scouts and interns who will be doing the searching as well. The database manager provides the inputs which actually link back into the port program, which comes under the small business channel. And we also have the normal administrative aspects as well. So that the Water Council's objective, let me say this again, is that of economic development. It is not a consultant. It is not a private enterprise, and its role is really to provide that linkage and to facilitate the transport or translation of research into industry and economic development. That summarizes, and if I go back to the first slide, I think it, can you get me back to the first slide?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Answers or has given an overview of those first questions. So I hope I've said about how the program came about, from looking at the call for the industry efficiency program, and realizing this came about also from focus groups with industry who said, we are spending a fortune, we don't feel we are getting value for money. It's about taking innovation and getting it to commercialization and exchanging that information with industry. Our focus is water in its broadest sense, 34 NAICS code. The program links anybody who's an innovator to anybody who's a commercializer. And it works by a small group of people who've got detailed and specialist knowledge, bringing that together under a search and screen activity. I've talked a little bit about water technology, and water technology really is everything, and it's not just simply as you think of water. And we believe that the FLC has many, many activities, and just looking at some of the federal labs' patent databases, we found big discrepancies between what they classify as water and those other areas where we know those technologies can be applied by the water industry. And finally, we need to back that up by helping the FLC achieve the objective of making its research and data more readily available to the public. How can you get involved at this stage? We would like to say we'd love to be in it. Can we be part of it? And we can then start talking about things such as, if necessary, non-disclosure agreements, what aspects of security may be required, and then how we can really link your technology into industry. Karen, that's what I've got for the moment. If you want to add any more points on this?
Yeah, thank you, David. I would just add that we see a couple of opportunities for intersection with FLC. We know that FLC is at the beta stage or beyond with the FLC Business 2.0 database, and our vision is that we would be able to link that data set into the Global Water Port to allow to see the intersections of the technologies that are resonant within some of the federal labs, along with all the different data sets that are available to us in the Global Water Port, to allow more of those technologies, processes, and innovations to be identified. So beyond that, we know that that's going to not only require the database, as David mentioned, but relationships with the federal laboratories. So if you are involved in portfolio management or technology translation activities within one of the federal labs, we want to get to know you and those portfolios, so that even if we are not able to identify by means or through means of those databases, that we're still able to identify potential technologies that could be brought forth to industry. So we would love your involvement and get to know specific individuals within the federal labs. Finally, I know that there may be some innovators who have technologies that may have posted innovations today, and if there's specific technologies, we want to become aware of those that would align with water, that would solve water issues. So those are the intersections that I see for involvement. What I'm planning to do now is to kind of pivot here and introduce the Everglades Foundation and their George Barley Water Prize and how we came to be aware of their particular challenge. They actually were visiting the Milwaukee area, and we had a meeting with them. And so they're doing at a broad scale what we're trying to do within industry. So George Barley Water Prize is looking at a particular challenge and trying to find innovative solutions to meet a particular challenge. So we've invited the Everglades Foundation to join us today and to talk about their particular water challenge, their water prize that they have put out, and what the possible intersections and overlaps are with the FLC audience that's on the phone today. So I would love to turn it over to our friends at the Everglades Foundation. Leanne, I believe you were going to start off your presentation, so I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen.
And Leanne, sorry, just for a minute. Karen, there is a question from two participants. One of them is that how can they contact ICE? Like one of them question is like how can they contact you?
That's a great question. I can put in the chat my email and also Dr. Garman's email address. Either one of us would be able to answer questions about ICE Institute and getting involved in ICE.
Sure. The other question, Karen, is that, first of all, there's a remark that it's a brilliant plan, and, people are really appreciating that. They're saying that all of the research and tech scouting is there, but what are the plans to market this resource to ensure that those innovating through the water industry and those looking for solutions outside the water industry are able to tap it and to avoid the current fractured scouting efforts across the water world? So if you can just answer that.
So if I understand the question correctly, it's how can someone basically be aware or find out about the technologies that are identified? Am I summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, that's.
So the ICE Institute is a member program. We have information about membership in the program and how to take advantage of the member benefits. There's different levels of membership for ICE Institute, and it's really, those levels are directly correspondent to the level of benefit that a company or an individual would want to receive. So there is a detailed listing of the member benefits and the membership fees on our website, so I can send that link as well and put that in the chat.
On the second part of that, the members will be giving us a list of their priority areas, and some of these will be made public, others will be restricted, but we will be putting, as we go through, we'll be putting the list of publicly available priority areas on the website, so that people who think they may have been missed or want to be included as far as that goes, we'll be able to put input into our system.